Hi to all, and welcome to another episode of Il Gioco podcast. It's been quite a long time that I have done last podcast, and now we begin again with a terrific guest, Dave Morris. Hi, Dave.
Hi there.
Okay.
Nice to be on again, Riccardo.
My pleasure. Let's begin immediately, and let's talk about your last book. Dave, what was the very first idea or image that eventually became Cthulhu 2050 Whispers Beyond the Stars?
Well, it's a kind of, invention is always a roundabout route. Pavel Zemsky got in touch with me, and he had an idea for a story involving a comet passing the Earth in sort of 100 years ago. And I did a comic book 10 years ago called Mirabilis, Year of Wonders, which was already covered the idea of a green comet appears in the sky, and as it gets closer to the Earth, imaginary things become real. So it breaks down the boundary between the imaginary and the real. And I said to Pavel, I can't work on a Cthulhu thing like that because it's too close to my comic book. And also because I feel Lovecraft, it's been overdone in terms of sticking with a kind of pulp era thing. Lovecraft's whole thing was to make his horror contemporary. And so I think he'd rather we were doing stuff set in 2026 or later rather than 1926. So anyway, Pavel is a great guy, very flexible. And so, and often creativity comes out of forcing changes on people. So we decided to come up with something different. So I said, well, look at what often Robert Chambers is evoked when talking about Lovecraft because of the King in Yellow, even though it's not specifically Cthulian. And I said, look what he did in Repair of Reputations is he anticipated what American and New York life would be like in 25, 30 years time. So let's do the same thing now and imagine life in 2050 and make our Cthulhu story sit around. But before we go on, by the way, I just ought to say I would say Cthulhu because I'm so used to it, but I think I've even did a blog post on Lovecraft's pronunciation where the CT is clearly a separate sound. So people always assume the TH is a th, but actually I suspect Lovecraft intended it to be Cthulhu. So not Cthulhu, but Cthulhu. But we'll say Cthulhu because everybody does. So yeah, we thought, let's imagine what the world of 2050 might be like. Let's just do a kind of near future dystopian, semi-dystopian future. Arguably anybody's view of the future from the present, it will always feel dystopian because they're out of their comfort zone. But we thought let's put some Cthulhu influences into that, and it also lets us kind of extrapolate from the modern world, make it more existentially threatening, because I think there's always a coziness to say if we put a Cthulhu story in 1926 and it's the Call of Cthulhu thing where it's in hard-boiled private detectives and all that stuff, it's kind of like, okay, but it's silly, really, where it's not frightening. And I wanted it to really be very disturbing indeed. So we wanted some scenes that hopefully will really give people nightmares, the way I think HPL would have liked us to.
Out of the comfort zone and straight into the abyss.
Yeah.
Why combine cyberpunk and cosmic horror?
Well, I don't really think of it as cyberpunk, I have to say. It's cyberpunk in the sense that I spend half my day talking to Claude. We're already cyberpunk in that case. I talk to Claude, I talk to Gemini, I talk to various LLMs. I use them for research, like Notebook LM. I often say, just to clarify, I don't use them for writing. I think they're terrible at writing, but they're very, very good as assistants. And so we're already in the future. I don't know how long we can continue to call it cyberpunk. So I don't see it that way. I just see it as it's a future in which there is AI and there's robotics. There's a degree of space travel. It's the future that's coming right now. Really, we're in the third millennium. So
we are already in the future.
Yeah.
A strange thing, you give the player a defined protagonist. In a game book, it's unusual, no? Isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it is. I mean, there are degrees of defined protagonist. Steam Highwayman gives you a role, but doesn't insist on the reason you fill that role. That's up to you. I generally prefer seeing game books as like role-playing games in a way, in that I expect the player to have complete agency over the character they create. But because we only had the one book and we wanted to create a linear narrative, most of my game books are open world, but because it's a linear narrative, I think having a defined character lets us imply a backstory and bring in some history to that character, as that you start with no memory, it's been wiped, but you pick up bits of your history as you go. And
Alex has amnesia.
Yes, I mean it's voluntary amnesia, partial amnesia applied by the state in order to get parole, early parole for a crime that we don't immediately know what that crime is. It mainly gives us an excuse to put a character into the world that doesn't know all about the world. They've been in prison for 10 years. So we can explain the world to the reader without appearing to give info dumps, that it's genuinely stuff that Alex, by the way, Alex could be male or female. I'm always really keen that the player is not told, because I remember even when I was writing my first game books, they used to say to me, 99% of our readers are boys. And I said, yeah, but 1% are girls then, so don't put them off. So Alex could be male or female, we don't know that. But it does mean that Alex has to ask other people, why are things done that way from time to time? And we're able to tell the player in a natural way what the world is like.
Of course, there are many other game books about Lovecraftian universe, but how do a reader or a writer reconcile choices in a game book with a cosmic helplessness?
That is a good question.
No choice.
Yes, I mean, there's ultimately, I suppose I do lean towards, I don't know if it's necessarily very popular, but I lean towards a degree of downbeat endings anyway. People sometimes, somebody was saying to me the other day, oh, they got to the right ending in Heart of Ice. I said, what's the right ending? They said, oh, I got ultimate power. And I said, that's not the right ending. I mean, none of the endings are really good. They're all downbeat. And I kind of like stories that go that way. So I don't mind destroying the world if necessary, or destroying mankind or whatever. You can have, I think it's like life. We don't go around saying we don't have agency, but terrible things are happening in the world. We're either not able to control them, or we're not even trying to control them. I mean, the very fact that somebody was saying to me today about, carbon emissions. I said, yeah, everybody in the West is guilty. It's not just if you happen to stream a 3-hour movie or use a computer. We're all in debit because other parts of the world are effectively paid to make us the wealthiest people in the world. So anyway, we have a degree of agency in our lives, but it doesn't mean our life is going to have a great outcome. But we don't end, each day thinking, oh, I didn't win. We achieved the things we were trying to achieve. So it's about defining what are you actually expecting. It's save the world. I've always hated as a game concept or a story concept, but you can save one person or the people that you care about, and that can feel like a victory even in the middle of a terrible defeat. So you can have hopeless existential horror and still, the perfect example I know is the Seventh Seal. The knight is going to die. The world, everyone is getting the Black Death, but he gets one family out, and that's the victory over death that he finally wins. And that's a great movie, and nobody says, well, he didn't really have agency because he didn't stop the Black Death.
Have you seen the final scene, or near the final scene of Rifkin Festival, Woody Allen's Rifkin Festival, when Wallace meet with death, like in the Seal?
Yes.
Very. Don't forget your colonoscopy. Yeah, the last stuff. It's about. Okay. Okay. You wrote the book with Pavel Zieski. And how did you maintain consistency across Pavel's branches?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I mean, collaborations can work in all kinds of different ways. There's one game book that I did with Jamie, and I think it's the same thing that Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson did on Warlock of Firetop Mountain, which is they just write to halfway through the book, stop, and the other one takes it up. And I did that with Jamie on Keep of the Lich Lord, which was another fighting fantasy. In this case, Pavel and I worked more closely. First of all, we had a number of kind of chats where we were building up a kind of a Bible of the future world on Google Docs, and we would be putting lots of ideas into that, some of which, it's like an iceberg. Many of them didn't appear in the book, but they're still informing the book. One of the things I don't think we mentioned, what would a Shoggoth look like? And we, at least in Mountains of Madness, we used the example of nudibranchs, the undersea creatures. They're interesting little protoplasmic things. And we then got to talking about these kind of deformable robots that can squeeze into different spaces, and all that stuff just becomes, hundreds and hundreds of little chats about something that we probably only becomes one line in the book, but we were doing all that for a while. And then I took the basic run through of the whole book, wrote about 250 sections that went beginning to end, but with a number of snipped choices off the side, so that Pavel could effectively read the whole main through line, but he could develop all kinds of other intertwining sections. So he then took it and sort of added another 200%. So that he's probably written 2/3, and I wrote the core third, as it were, something like that.
In one of your game book, what makes a choice genuinely meaningful?
Ideally, if it's difficult to make, and choices that are free, that you might as well not ask about. The perfect thing is when Heart of Ice, people who say this is the perfect ending, and I'm, well, okay, if you think so. I think that's a pretty horrible ending, but those are choices where you might think, for example, do I betray this guy? I mean, hopefully, if you're emotionally invested, that's still a difficult choice. You think that it's terrible if you think, oh, they're just an NPC, I don't care. Well, if you're not going to enter into the fiction, that's not a difficult choice. But if you were playing around the table and they were other players, you'd feel the bite of, I have to at some point break this alliance, but when I do, I'll be the bad guy. And so that's a great emotional. They can be kind of logically difficult. There is no certain better outcome, no dominant choice, or they can be better and emotional, relationship-based, difficult choice. Those are the ones I really like. I mean, in VulcanVerse, there's the choice of which side you're going to take at the end, and hopefully, depending on the relationships you've built throughout, that's going to have serious repercussions, because people that you like and have previously befriended may end up on the other side. So it, kind of like, you know, Captain America's Civil War, great movie because you have friends fighting, and when you have two good people fighting, that's much more interesting than a bad guy versus a good guy.
You have quoted VulcanVerse. I would like to discuss a little bit about this one in this chat. It's one of your major recent projects. It is an extraordinarily ambitious open world game book series created with Jamie Thomson and extending across 5 interconnected volumes. How would you introduce VulcanVerse to somebody who has never encountered the books of the digital world?
I would say it's not what you think. A lot of people say, oh, it's ancient Greek myth. And once you actually get into it, it's not quite that. It's kind of ancient Greek myth meets the Matrix in a way, I suppose. I'm very interested, although I don't, unlike Elon Musk, I haven't drunk the Kool-Aid and I don't believe we're in a simulation, but I'm very interested in Nick Bostrom's ideas about the simulation hypothesis. And that's effectively part of, or maybe it's, but it's not clear in VulcanVerse. Again, it was an interesting route that it came about, in that Jamie Thomson, who I worked with, was involved with a company who had created this idea of the VulcanVerse as a kind of Greek, I think because the company was based in Athens, it was kind of Greek style. And but luckily we had a free rein with the game books, so the game books don't bear any relation. It was a kind of cryptocurrency based NFT thing, I think, but I never really saw it and they left us alone, so we did our own thing. So what's the VulcanVerse? Well, it's an open world, so anyone who hasn't encountered open worlds, you can join in any book and you can travel back and forth. There's no one particular line. There are bits you can skip. VulcanVerse is a little bit more constrained than, say, Fabled Lands, in that there is an overall plot. In fact, half of the final book, you enter into almost a linear storyline. So there's about 800 sections, which is the end game. But everything up until then, you can do in any order. But you are passing certain tests that your deity, or an entity that may or may not be a deity, has set you. And when you've achieved all of those, it's a kind of entrance examination, a test for whether you are the hero of the age who they need to complete the final section of the book. But it does mean that it has an end and then you finish the story. So it's more like something like, I guess, a modern computer role-playing game, in that you don't go around forever. You reach an end and that's it.
The world in VulcanVerse is created by Vulcan as a new Olympus. Why was Vulcan, or Hephaestus, the right god to place at the center of this universe?
I think Jamie's idea was that if the gods were losing influence in the modern world, Vulcan, you'd have to ask him this, but that Vulcan would be the god who would understand modern technology and could create a virtual world in which the world that the gods were used to still exists. So that, in a way, is, I think, the idea is that it's, as I say, I don't imagine it as simple as, say, the Matrix, where you have the real world and an imaginary world. It's more, there are layers of simulation and you're never sure, are we at the top layer, reality, or are we 50 stacks down in some kind of simulation? And you're not really clear about that. It seems there's an engine to the world that Vulcan has built, and you can, in the final book, hack it and start to change parts of the world around you by learning the exploits and the terminals that you can use to gain access to the mainframe, as it were. But yeah, that was basically Jamie's original idea, was that Vulcan was the one who'd set all this up, and that the other gods had had really just effectively been recreated within his simulation.
How do you and Jamie divide the responsibilities about writing the book, writing the series?
It's easier with an open world series because you know each book is a region. So when all we really need to know in theory is if somebody comes in, you know, on the map, if somebody comes in here, what section do I have to make that number so that it correlates with the number in the other book? So we start by just saying these are the crossing points, and so you must have that number in your book because I'm going to put it in my book. And then usually I'll send Jamie some sections of a quest, for example, that need to go in part of his world, and he might send me some that need to go in one that I'm writing. So some little bits get shared between us, but 90% of what we write in each book, or more than that, is we just write it, and then you know they just have to connect. So we'll have a little bit of a discussion, but I think, for example, the 12 labors that you have to complete to qualify for the end game, Jamie and I didn't talk about what they would have to be in each book. We just said you have 3 labors to complete, and then he would just do it and tell me these are the code words if you've completed those 3 labors. That's all I needed to know, really. So it's much more independent than it would be if you're writing like I was with Tavolo, where you're writing one book together.
What's the news about? What's the most recent news about VulcanVerse?
Well, it's finished. There's not much more to it.
There are 5 books.
There are 5 books. I started. I flowcharted them all, and they do look like things of beauty when you flowchart them. But I've done that specifically in order to run a parser, because when you write the book, you don't think in terms of how do you turn this into code. But of course, it would be nice to turn them into some kind of computer game as well, because some people don't want to pick up a book. They'd rather play a game on screen. So, but the trouble is then unpicking the story logic from natural language. So having to run a parser that catches maybe 80% of the logic we put in, and having a markup language where I can say this is prose, this is logic. I started doing that for one of the books, and it's taking a long time. So it's kind of one of the projects I put to one side. And until there's a big demand for the computer game, I kind of think I don't have to code the computer game right now. And also I'd have to do lots of artwork for it, which is never my favorite thing. So I'll put that on the back burner, I think.
We have 5 books for VulcanVerse. That is The Houses of the Dead, The Hammer of the Sun, The Pillars of the Sky, The Wild Woods, and The Workshop of the Gods.
Yep.
Okay, let's get back to...
I was just going to say about the Workshop of the Gods, an interesting thing about that is it's, I think I've forgotten, about 1,600, more than 1,600 sections long. And, you know, it's a large format, so it's a big book. But the French edition is normal book size. So I was talking to the French publisher and they said, we simply can't do it at that size. The spine will be this big and it will fall in half, literally just break. So I realized that the end game part is almost exactly half of the total book. So I renumbered all the sections as 2 parts so that the French edition can be Workshop of the Gods Part 1 and Workshop of the Gods Part 2. Kind of sounds like a Marvel movie, but it means that it can be a sensible size for people's bookshelves.
Workshop of the Gods, the final game.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. What are the mechanics Cthulhu in the last book?
Those are mostly Pavel's. We like to keep them simple. The most interesting mechanic is kind of a flashbacks / dream mechanic, that because it's always if you kill the player off, you've really failed. They don't want to go back to the start. The writer doesn't want you to have to go back to the start, but at the same time you want to feel there's some threat. So we typically have you go back, and you go back a certain number of sections, so you get to change what you did, but there's a kind of psychological cost. I'm never very happy with baking in mental health. I know that it's become a trope of all Cthulhu gaming since Call of Cthulhu that sanity is a stat. I think that when you read Lovecraft, he's typically picked a sensitive protagonist, but there are protagonists in The Whisper in Darkness, I think, or no, the Dulwich Horror, who turn up and quite matter-of-factly tackle the horror with no loss of sanity. They just think, they're basically like having the Avengers turn up. It's like, we can handle this. They get out the book and they subdue the monster. And
my favorite Lovecraft story, the Dunwich Horror.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, it's a very good one. But I think
help me, Father Yogg-Sothoth.
Yes, yeah. But I think so. Therefore, not everybody in a Cthulhu story should be losing sanity, and also I'm slightly dubious about the whole idea. It's too simplistic. Mental health is much more complicated than a stat, right? So I'm slightly uncomfortable with that whole SAN idea that's crept in from Call of Cthulhu anyway. But nonetheless, we decide that stress is definitely a factor. The whole point is that it's not as if this sort of thing happens to Alex Dragon, the protagonist, all the time, but this is a seminal moment. Everything is going wrong in the world. Almost reality falling apart. So we felt that having that idea of physical stress and mental stress is legitimate. It's not what we would put into every Cthulhu story, but I think in this case we felt it does make sense. It was a considered decision to put it in.
Has Powell added something that you would not have created alone in this game book?
Many things, I'm sure. I mean, in any collaboration, you hope that it's more than the sum of the parts. That each time one of you says something, the other one says, "What about this?" And then the two of you go, "Oh, well, that could take us here," and you wouldn't have independently got there. So, yeah, I think there are many instances of that in the books.
Was it difficult to communicate such a complex book, and the question that we make us pass to another section of this podcast? Must an author nowadays also be a marketer?
Well, I've never been very good at marketing, and of course, when I started out, I didn't have to be. The publisher did everything. I think that I see that people do books now, and they get immediately 250 5-star reviews on Amazon. I imagine they're doing something. I don't know what it is to do that. If you put a book out, you do not get 250 5-star reviews the next day. I guess you have to go onto forums and you have to do things like, I'll give you a 5-star review if you give me a 5-star review. Not only do I not know how to do that, I refuse to do it. It's market trading. It's not, I'm not against marketing, but if it's just barter, like you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, those are just not helpful to the reader. You're not getting a genuine 5-star review. You're getting a favor. So I love every time I get a review, even if the reader hates the book. I still feel pleased that somebody took the time to read it and write a review. Frankly, obviously it's nicer if they liked it, but I want them to be genuine reviews. So I think from a marketing point of view, I mean, other than that, you just have to spend money. I mean, people use Kickstarter, but Kickstarter's really for professionals now. Amateurs can't do much with it. So I don't have the answer to that one at all. We did a bunch of videos about Whispers Beyond the Stars, the Cthulhu book, and we talked about our design process. But of course, how many hundreds of thousands of videos are there on YouTube? Somebody has to find it. We hope that over the one thing in our favor today is that when I started out, if you wrote a book, publishers would put that out and they would give it a few months, and then they had other books coming along. So your book would still be around, but you would gradually see it vanish from bookshops, and people could, in those days, they didn't even have an internet to order books from, but you could ask a bookshop to order a book. Now, if you write something, it can be effectively available forever. So the good thing is, if somebody sees me and Tavolo talking about Whispers Beyond the Stars in the year 2050, they can still buy the book. We may not care by then, or I probably won't, but Tavolo will be grateful for them buying it.
In your opinion, did the name Cthulhu help people understand the project, or risk making it look less original than it really is?
That's a good point. I mean, for one thing, I don't know how Cthulhu has become the main sort of brand stamp for that mythos, because after all, there are other entities, Yog-Sothoth and Nyarlathotep, Azathoth, all of those creatures, and yet for some reason, I mean, we're primarily talking, and Cthulhu doesn't get a look in. It's really mostly Migo are the main primary antagonist, in the sense as an antagonist, and it's perfectly possible that the Migo have never heard of Cthulhu. I mean, they're simply beings from elsewhere, and they're a different class of being anyway. So if you said Cthulhu to them, they're probably, what are you even talking about? So it's kind of a label. I mean, that's why I tend to call it Whispers Beyond the Stars rather than Cthulhu 2050, because there are so many Cthulhu things anyway out there, and really also because they've acquired a brand that doesn't really, I think, honestly reflect what Lovecraft was trying to do. That the Call of Cthulhu stuff, and good luck to them, but as I say, it's hard-boiled detectives meet monsters, and sanity is at stake. But Lovecraft was talking about a kind of almost hero-less existential horror, which I hope we've got. Moments where you think, there's literally nothing I could do about this, and it's absolutely terrifying. And those are good things. I want that feeling. And I don't think that's what most people mean by Cthulhu. They mean a sort of slightly jolly, silly horror thing, a camp horror. We don't want it to be camp horror. We want it to be really chillingly horrific.
In your experience, do interviews and podcasts directly sell books, or do they mainly build trust over time?
I think they, not so much directly. Well, people do obviously hear about a book that way. I think it's often a case of, because they hear about lots of things, and it's a case of thinking, oh, I'd heard about that thing, and now I've seen them talking about it, and they said some intelligent things, and it sounds like I might like that. And it kind of tips they're already wondering, and it'll tip them towards maybe looking at the work. But I've never, again, I don't understand this. For example, Heart of Ice is my most popular game. There are 3 other books I wrote in that series. They very rarely sell at all. I mean, they sell a bit, but they're way behind Heart of Ice. And I think that's curious, because if I read a book by an author and I really liked it, I'd probably look at another book by that author, but that's not how people necessarily think. Sometimes they don't even notice the author's name. But then I've always been the kind of person who, if I watch a movie, I'll be able to reel off who wrote it, what year it was released, who directed it, all that stuff. If I read a book, I tend to, like with Lovecraft, when I discovered Lovecraft, I think age 12 or 13, I read all of Lovecraft. That's the way I think. Not everybody thinks that way.
In your opinion, how much of a crowdfunding campaign success is determined before it publicly launches?
I think these days a huge amount, because people will say to me, "Oh, did you see that there's this kind of board game that's a bit like Fabled Lands, and they raised, you know, $500,000 or something?" I said, "Well, yes, but they had a big marketing campaign behind them. It wasn't just. It's not the quality of the work or the idea. It really professionals are taking it over, and you see these board games with very lavish extras, because you have to offer extras on Kickstarter. Again, I'm not really interested. People say, "Oh, you could have special dice, or you could have little figurines." I go, "Look, I'm a writer. I write books. I do want people to read my stuff, but I don't make figurines. I don't make special dice. That's just not my thing." So I think you have to be willing to run it as a business, Kickstarter now. Nobody is ever going to come up with a great idea and from a standing start really get enough to do it. And actually, if you do a book, the amount that you get, considering you've got to print books for people, the actual amount you end up with is way less than the time you've had to spend writing. But it's just when we write something like VulcanVerse, the final book probably took me over a year. I had 50 pages of notes on just the end game. But I was in France, and one of the other writers said to me, it's done for love, isn't it? And I said, well, yeah, ultimately, we hope to make some money back, but you don't spend a year of your life on something like that because you think it's going to make you rich. You do it because you really want to get it right. And so, yeah, every writer has to think first, this is a work of art, and I hope I'm not going to be like Van Gogh and Rembrandt and die in poverty, but at the same time, it's not going to be like being a rock star, you
know. What elements, or one element of Whispers Beyond the Stars, are you personally proudest of?
I think there's a book just out by M. John Harrison. I think it's called The End of Everything. He's one of the very early pioneers of the new wave science fiction from the 1960s. He was involved in New Worlds SF, along with Mike Moorcock and people like that. And he's just released The End of Everything. I think he's a great example of somebody who's been continuing to write for 50 plus years, and hopefully he'll go on and on. And he's talking about a world. His book came out after ours, and I'm sure he didn't see ours or vice versa. But he's talking about a world that's also falling apart, and he talks about, in that world, bad patches, where you stray into an area where things are just wrong. And there are a few, we didn't call them bad patches, but there are a few similar scenes, moments in Whispers Beyond the Stars, where you stray into those kind of areas, and something, if it were a movie, you'd think, oh, that's a very creepy moment. And those are the things I really like. I think, as I say, if Lovecraft were around, I think he'd go, oh yeah, that's what I mean by existential horror. That's really frightening.
What did this project allow you to do that you had never done in an earlier game book?
Partly, I suppose, because I don't normally do science fiction. I mean, Heart of Ice is, but it's science fantasy. Actual SF, where it's grounded, it's 25 years in our future. The main thing was an opportunity to kind of elaborate in fiction a lot of the stuff that people are talking about now, but it's hard to get a handle. I saw an interview with Elon Musk last week, and he was talking about money becoming meaningless. You think, yes, but if that were true, and maybe it is, but how will that work? I mean, in what sense will it be meaningless, and what will people who do or don't have resources, how will they live? And so we wanted to sort of show what that world would be like, because I'm fairly sure it won't be a utopia for everybody. I mean, I'm sure Elon Musk will still have a private jet or 7, but I won't, and most people will not be living that well. So we kind of wanted to say, okay, you could have almost a post-scarcity world, but how will that actually work out for the people living in it? It won't be. I don't think it's Star Trek's 23rd century is my thinking. Maybe that's where it leans more into the kind of cyberpunk dystopian. I mean, I don't think it's a terrible. It's not necessarily. No, I say a dystopia. It's a dystopia in that it's not the way we want to live now. But people who live then will not say to you in 2050, "We live in a terrible world," or some people will. We might look at it and think, "Oh, I don't think I'd want to live there." But I wanted to kind of show it as it's a working world. That's how this is the world that's going to fall apart. And if you have robots, what would those robots be like? You know, they won't all be, you know, multi-million-pound robots. They'll be the robots you can get for $600. Well, what will they be like? Those kinds of things. So it's just a way of kind of taking all these things that I kind of like to think about. And I particularly like fiction as a way of describing those things, to let people discuss it and come back and say, I don't agree with your vision of the future, which, you know, we may be wrong.
But could the world of Cthulhu 2050 support further protagonists and stories?
I don't want to give away any of the ending. I would, if Pavel said, let's do another Lovecraftian book, I'd go, great. But I don't think I'd want to. I don't like sequels anyway, on the whole. I feel as if you tell a good story, you should just be able to tell a good story. Aristotle said beginning, middle, and end, not beginning, middle forever. So I hate sequels anyway. I think they're only done because of product recognition, marketing, and not done for creative reasons. So there are examples. Every season of Buffy moved the story on in a good way. So Joss Whedon did a good job there. Every time there was a new season, he didn't just do more of the same. Buffy had a new kind of problem, a new development in her life, and he kept that going. That's great. But I think far too often, I mean, I hear that there's going to be a Blade Runner 2099. I go, why? It exists only to put money in the pockets of the studios and Ridley Scott. There's no other reason for that to exist. So I would hate to just do a sequel for a reason like that.
And finally, without revealing any major spoilers, why should somebody enter the world of Whispers Beyond the Stars, and what should they be prepared to lose?
Well, I think they've got to be steely of nerve. They're going to face, and it's not going to be a romp. It'll be harrowing. It should be harrowing. So if you like that, and I do, I want to be disturbed by fiction. I like it. The more disturbing it is to me, the better. As you get older, it's harder and harder to be really disturbed by stuff. But that's the stuff I remember from when I was a kid, when it was the stuff I shouldn't have even been watching. And that was, nowadays, you know, parents would never allow their kids to watch. But those were the things that really stuck with me. So anybody who is willing to take that kind of experience, I think they will enjoy it. I think also if you kind of think you like Lovecraft's work, but you think in gaming it's very, and I don't want to throw shade on Call of Cthulhu. I think it's great fun, but it feels more Derlethian than Lovecraftian. So this is just an attempt to let HPL get a bit more control of his own ideas again. So those are, if you favor the real cosmic horror and you're of strong stomach, then those are the reasons I think to go for it.
Okay, Dave, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and I hope to welcome you back very soon. Indeed, I'd love to have you as a regular guest on my podcast and consider it like an invitation. I would be delighted to have you back whenever you have new projects or ideas you would like to discuss with us.
Well, thank you, Ricardo. I mean, of course I would. It's a great pleasure for me too, and because I very rarely get the chance to talk, intelligently about books. If I'm at a convention, it's usually just how long did it take you to write this? People don't have time for this kind of discussion, which is, of course, really what writers want to do is talk about all the stuff that didn't get in onto the page. So yeah, that's always a great pleasure. And yeah, I'll happily come back. And if you're talking to Jamie and you want me along on that, I'll join in.
I hope Jamie will join us finally, eventually.
Did you wanted
Because
to ask about his new? He's supposed to be writing Fabled Lands book 8, which has mostly been written by Paul Gresti, but Jamie is supposed. So hopefully, the reason he's not here today is because he's working on that.
I am continually. I will keep on asking him to join me on this podcast, even if the previous ones didn't get the result.
Well,
I won't. Okay. Okay. They take care and speak to you soon. And goodbye and good evening to all our followers, all our viewers for this podcast.
thank you, Ricardo.
Bye.
Bye.